So, welcome to our Monday night. We're so grateful that you are all here. And we know that there's some women who literally are messaging me as we speak, and they are running late. So, we'll pop them in when they can. And we're grateful that you are here live. I know that Tamara has an incredible message, and I want to share with you who Tamara is because a lot of women will come into our collective, and what they feel instantly that we've all known each other for years and we're old friends. Well, some of us have known each other half our lives, and some of us have acted as if we've known each other more than half our lives because we're so aligned and very connected. And a lot of us have different interests, we have different um, businesses. Some of us have passions versus businesses, which we've talked about a lot about this last week because our very own Martha is launching her Retired with Purpose this week, which I'll tell you more about at the end. And so we are all women desiring greater, better for ourselves and those that we surround ourselves with. And we take 1 hour of time to be here and we learn, we gather, we grow, and we inspire. And my very special friend, Miss Tamara, is going to teach tonight. And what I love, you can see on our website, we have lots of mentors. And Tamara is a performance mentor. She has her own Upward Vocal Studios, a seasoned professional and extensive experience in theater, radio, TV, and film, as well as guiding figure in both the arts and motherhood. With a career spanning over 3 decades, Tamara has excelled as an actor, singer, director, producer, specializing in the cultivation of artistic talent. Her areas of expertise encompass acting for stage, screen, and voiceovers, audition preparation, vocal development, character creation, script analysis, and as a member of the Actors Union SAG-AFTRA and with the FCC commercial licensing, she seamlessly combines professional standards with nurturing teaching approach. And what's so very special is she goes to her students. So it's very significant, very special. She's part of their family. And what I love most about Tamara is that she has the ability to dissect things in such a beautiful way and give us such incredible feedback that we can use. And if you've ever heard me say there's feedback you can lose and there's feedback you can use, she is the one that shares this, and we are so very grateful. So thank you for being here. We are going to turn it over to Tam.
Thank you, Maggie. Yes, I am actually going to be teaching that concept, feedback you can use and feedback you can lose, on Saturday. I'm doing a Journey to the Spotlight event with my very good friend, Adam Fleck, which some of you here know him from the coaching world, and also my new best friend, one of my new best friends, Christina Walker. And so we're talking about what you do before the audition, how you get to the audition. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about is feedback you can use and feedback you can lose. So thank you so much for that introduction. And some of you may or may not know, I have a background in Stephen ministry as well. I'm a certified Stephen minister, which is somebody who they're the lay people of the church that support the pastors by doing visitations so that we're basically trained active listeners, right? So we are certified just like a counselor is, but we are not counselors, but we help people walk through difficult situations. And as an extension of that, I went on then to lead a group for survivors of domestic abuse. And so that group was called Stronger Than Espresso. And some of the things I'm going to be speaking on today are from that book. And because boundaries is something that when you are in a cycle and a generational abuse, that is the pattern of behavior that happens, that you have to learn to establish boundaries. So I am going to speak from kind of that perspective because I like to look at things from a parenting perspective, right? As Maggie said, I go to my student houses as one of my services as a performance coach. And one of the reasons I do that is because most often kids are more comfortable in their homes. And I tend to work with a lot of neurodivergent kids, so ADHD kids, kids on the spectrum, because my kids are neurodivergent. And so I have a way of working with them. It's interesting because when I work with other people's children, all the neurodivergent stuff doesn't bother me at all. But my own children, it tends to get on my nerves. So I always say that I'm parenting by extension. I'm part of the team to help the other parents. And just like me, I hire other people to help with my team. So I like to look at things from a parenting perspective. So I will mention that, but we are all children and we all have a childhood, and none of us escape childhood without some bumps and bruises. Let's just put it that way. So I am going to share my screen. All right, here we go. Yes, share this screen. Can everybody see this? Okay, hold on. Now I have to go to where I tell it to present. I love technology. I love technology. I love technology.
We say that often. Yes, it's
I hit the button
beautiful.
twice, so let me get it back to that. Okay. So, all right. So I am comparing us as individuals as if we are gardens, right? All of us have a garden. We are a garden, and we have a gate and a shepherd's staff. Those are my symbolisms, my metaphors that I'm going to be using for today's presentation. So we're from surviving to flourishing through healthy boundaries, right? So, oh, I hit the button and it didn't go. Why didn't it go? Okay, so every woman has a garden. Every heart is a garden entrusted to our care. That is the quote. So if you think about it, what are some of the things that we have in our garden? We have our faith. We have our family, careers, our health, our time, our marriage, friendships, dreams, peace, calling. All of those things are what we are growing in our gardens, right? And if you think about that, that's a lot of things to have to nurture, tend to, grow, and they're going to grow at different paces and in different ways, right? And so we have to pay attention to all the details that go along with all of those elements that we are going to grow. And in one of the things that we have to do is we also have to protect those items, right? So you think of it this way, if our garden is our heart, we have to protect our heart. And how do we do that? So for things worth protecting need protection. So the way that we do that is our boundaries. When we talk about boundaries, it is a result of behaviors, right? So when you think about boundaries, a lot of times people think of them as walls, or my kids used to talk about rules, right? Oh, there's so many rules. And I'm like, the rules aren't there to control you. The rules are there to protect you, right? So I always say to my kids, the rules may give you this much space to move in, right? And then when you can demonstrate responsibility and that you can handle yourself, self-control in that, then I'm going to increase those boundaries, right? And we kind of learn to do that. It's just a natural progression, right? We're little, if you think of like kittens, if you've ever spent time with kittens, they'll kind of just stay around each other, and then eventually they get brave, and then eventually they have the courage to explore, and they move their boundaries. But the boundaries that protect us are what matters. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what happens if we have no boundaries, right? If we have no fence whatsoever, anyone has access to our heart, anyone can trample on us, anyone can come through and destroy our garden, right? They can take advantage of us. We start having then coping mechanisms when our boundaries are trampled on. So, but then you could have a concrete wall, right? If you put a concrete wall around your garden or your heart, if you will, now no one has access to you. So you have no joy, maybe no pain, but there's no balance there, right? And then you have no intimacy, you block everyone else. It's a very lonely place. Your garden becomes very lonely when you just have a complete wall. So instead, if you have a fence with a gate, that's what the boundaries do. That's what healthy boundaries will do for us. They're not walls. They're just a fence and you have a gate and you get to control the access to that gate. So why boundaries feel so hard? Now that's one of the things that when I'm working with women who are survivors of domestic abuse, and domestic abuse is not just physical violence. A lot of people think that it is, but it isn't. And if you think about it, when you are experiencing somebody who's controlling, right? They're going to try and control your finances. They're going to control your relationships. They're going to control how you speak, if you speak, your opinions. They're going to control absolutely everything about you. And so when you first are standing up against some of those things, it's really hard. So, but if you look at what we experience, those of us who haven't experienced that level of abuse, we still have experienced some of those challenges. So it can be very difficult for us, especially if you grew up in a household where someone is a victim of abuse, then they learn coping mechanisms and then we learn from them. So that's why boundaries can be so difficult. So most of us weren't taught boundaries, we were taught survival. And survival is not failure, it's wisdom for another season, right? So it's like you might not be in a season where you feel like you have learned the choices, how to make the choices. You will. It is something you can learn. So research by Dr. Brene Brown confirms that people with firm but kind boundaries are more compassionate, not less. So when you have those boundaries in place, it gives you more compassion than less. But some people think if I'm too mean, people will go away, people will not. That's one of the things that I've learned. I'm going to talk a little bit about later, but there's one of the things I learned as a business owner when I first started working with people. I felt like I had to take every single job, every single student that came along, because if I didn't, then I would lose all my referrals. And that's the other thing is my business is 100% referral. I have never advertised anywhere ever at any time. It was just one person said, hey, I'm looking for a voice teacher in a Facebook group. And then they were like, oh, well, we use Tammara. And then after that, so I've grown my studio from that. So you can see why I was hesitant to say no to people, because then I thought nobody else would ever come back. So I had to learn to put a boundary around my time. And what I've learned is most people are completely accepting of it. They go, oh, okay, sure, we can go to a different day, no big deal. So that's one of the things that we have to consider. Okay, so coping behaviors. When we feel like we're infringed upon and people are trampling on our in our garden, right? And making a big mess of things. We often have coping behaviors that go with them. So if you think of them as an umbrella, right? The handle of the umbrella is the pain that you're experiencing. And if you don't put a boundary on it, then some of the coping behaviors they become the ribs of that umbrella, right? Fear, shame, trauma, abandonment, loneliness, rejection. Those are the things then that we start to experience instead. So how do we cope? A lot of times, this is what we do as coping, right? When we experience some of those things, then we start to go towards comfort, right? We look for comfort. So when we don't establish boundaries, we start exhibiting behaviors that are less than healthy, and we start doing things like go towards alcohol, just one glass of wine every single night, maybe two, maybe three. We start going to food, or we go to shopping. The other one that you see there, that little icon, is a phone, technology. And we would call that more of, I wouldn't call it necessarily comfort as much as it is escape, right? So, and I'll talk more about that later. And then looking for comfort in love in all the wrong places, right? Sometimes we will run away, we'll hide, we'll fall asleep, often signs of depression is like falling asleep or close ourselves off. That's where those walls come up. And then the other thing is we get angry, right? And we start fighting against everybody. And there's things that would have been me most of my late teens and early adulthood. I was definitely angry with the world. And so different behaviors, the same goal, looking for safety. That's what we're looking for in our coping skills. So 4 common survival patterns: codependency, unhealthy relationships, addictions, which I'm going to put a slash there and say addictions/obsessions. Because when you look at the technology, when people are escaping into technology, it's not really the technology itself, it's what they're watching in that. They start becoming obsessed with watching certain things and becoming more involved in things that have nothing to do with them, right? And then hypersensitivity. So hypersensitivity is like you're losing control here, so you try and control everything else there. That's been something that I have had to work with and work through with most of my kids when it came to after COVID, post-COVID. They tended to be super hypersensitive about a lot of different things. So we're kind of dealing with that. How many years later? 6 years later. So at the center of every pattern, you're just trying to feel safe. You're trying to feel secure. And the first thing you need to do is realize when something is making you uncomfortable, or when you start realizing that you're going to all of these things. The codependency one, I wanted to read something about that because I was reading it in my book. I had forgotten that this is how they define it. And I thought it might ring a chord with some people. So it says, do others in the house fail to help cook, clean, or assist with chores around the house? Do you feel exhausted and have to do everything? Do you feel overcommitted and underappreciated? Are you hurt because no one seems to care, to know or care how you feel? And I've got to say, I have often felt like that in my household where I'm like, how come I'm the only one who notices when the floor is dirty? How come I'm the only one who's noticing the dishes piling up in the sink? How come I'm the only one who's noticing this? Well, this behavior is called codependency. Codependents attempt to control other things, things and events in lieu of controlling their own feelings. They are afraid of being hurt and rejected by others, and they often worry and feel anxious, guilty, and afraid. They are loyal and often remain in unhealthy relationships, which continue to erode their self-esteem and energy levels. So what I realized when I went through this program, and what reminded me when I read that again, was that was my mom. My mom often would complain about being the only one, but then if you tried to help her, she would tell you did it all wrong. And so that's another element of coping is when you are a perfectionist, right? When nobody can help you. So that's one of those things to kind of be aware of. So when you feel like what I did, my response when I felt like I was the only one in the house, and now mind you, I have to remind you that everybody in my house has ADHD. And so anything that I experience that other people experience in their houses, I feel like I could multiply by 100 because they all ignore dust. They all ignore dishes. They all ignore all those things. So what I did as a response was I went on strike. I said, I'm not going to cook the dinners. I'm not going to clean the house. I'm not going to do that unless they all do it. And so thus began my journey of chore charts, which Maggie knows a few of my chore charts. They're quite detailed and on a rotation system, so I don't have to tell anybody to do anything. Not that they do it, but they do exist. I just point to the chart. There it is. So neuroscience shows that when we overextend or suppress our needs, the amygdala triggers heightened anxiety and emotional fatigue. Anyone ever experienced that? I have. So the body's response to perceived lack of safety is anxiety and emotional fatigue. So this is what it looks like. Above, if you think of it like an iceberg, right? You can see what's above the water, and that what's below is far greater. So above the waterline, it looks like people pleasing, shopping, anger, perfectionism, isolation, control, working, eating. And then, but what's happening below the surface, what's really happening is fear, shame, rejection, feeling like you're not enough, loneliness, trauma, and abandonment. So behavior is the symptom, but it's not the root. It's not what's really causing the problem. So again, we need to establish healthy boundaries because we're being trampled, our gardens are being trampled on, which is our hearts. Studies confirm that self-compassion and assertive communication are directly linked to reduced burnout and greater emotional resilience. So addressing the root causes, not just the symptoms, is what we're looking for here. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, there's two types of boundaries, right? There's the boundaries that you need to impose upon others, and then there's boundaries that get imposed upon you. And recognizing the difference between the two, I like to use the safety analogy is the shepherd's hook, right? So in Psalm 23, one of the words is your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So like I was talking about with kids, you give them boundaries for what they can handle. And then as they grow and mature, you increase the boundaries, right? You give them more room with which the freedom, they can do whatever they want as long as it's within those boundaries. And that is something that gets imposed upon us. Now, I'm relating it here to God's laws. A lot of people look at it and they go, oh, I could never be a Christian. They have so many rules. Well, they're there for a reason, right? So, but why? Why is the shepherd's hook? Why does David use that analogy? And I like to use my little, my candy cane here, right? Because the candy cane, if you don't know the story, the history behind it, it was a group of pastors that this gentleman went to a candy maker and he said, I want to make something that he can give to kids during the very long services that would occupy them, but would also remind them. So I'm going to use this as my demonstration. So the hook for I'm going to go to the next screen here. And that'll actually, for some reason the keyboard part doesn't work. Okay. So the curved part of the shepherd's staff is actually what they would use to rescue the sheep that would get stuck in the crevices. They would hook them and then pull them out. And I also want to point out that when you have the hook upside down like this, it's a J, which stands for Jesus. So that was part of the candy making thing. But this is to protect, right? To rescue, to pull things out. And so we do that with our kids. And sometimes we need to be rescued as well. Again, those are what those boundaries do. The other part, the staff, the straight part, is the part that they would use for the sheep to guide them along the way. They would be like, okay, the road is like here, the safe part is here. So they would use the long staff to push the sheep into a straight line or away from danger, right? Or let's say the two of the sheep were not getting along so well and they would have to separate them or separate another shepherd's herd from there. So it is to protect, and they would also use it to against attacks. A lot of people think that shepherds use their staff to hurt their sheep, and they did. They would never, ever, ever hit their sheep with their staff. That was only for lions and other things that would come after them. So healthy boundaries do both. They rescue you and they defend you and protect you. So they do both of these, what both of the crook and the staff do, healthy boundaries. So has anybody, before I move on, well, actually, maybe I'll wait till the end. I have a question. I want you to think about it now. At the end, we'll talk about it after maybe we stop the recording. That's one of the advantages of being part of the live is you get to go into the discussion part of it. So the question I want you to think about is describe a situation in your life where you wish you could say no, right? Where you wish you had said no and you didn't. So start thinking about it now and we'll talk about it later. But if you think of your garden or your heart as, if you think of your heart as a garden and you start establishing boundaries and you put a gate, not everyone needs access to that gate. You have to put up, you have to be careful with who you give the key to, right? And it has to be earned. Access has to be earned. It's through trust, respect, safety, and consistency. That last one, that will get somebody almost every time. If they're not a genuine person, it will be the one that trips them up, right? Once or twice, they can earn your trust, but consistently over time. So that's when you give them very little access, very little access. And it kind of looks like this. So healthy boundaries. First, the first thing you have to do is you have to notice whenever your boundaries are being trampled on, or your heart's being trampled on. When you're being asked to overextend yourself, when you're being asked to do something that makes you uncomfortable, notice it. The second thing you do is you identify the emotion that you're feeling and the pattern of behavior, right? So then you have to start verbalizing, okay, this is what I don't like. What is it I actually need? And then you start defining that boundary for the other person and saying, this is what I need. And then you practice and you repeat with grace and consistency. It's going to take time. You're going to have to take some time to practice the skills. So healing happens once the fence was one fence post at a time. Each of that fence post represents some new identification of a boundary that you need to establish, right? So one of the things that I had to learn to do, I had a person in my life one time that just always had a way of making comments that undercut me, right? And so, for example, let me give you an example. And I had to put a boundary on them, and then I'll tell you how I established the boundary. And I realized as I was thinking about it today, this person was I started doing this with when my oldest was an infant. I started to notice. And then when my second daughter was an infant, so 3.5 years later, is when I started to establish the boundaries. But the first thing that I noticed was comments like, the person was expressing how they felt the need to always keep up appearances, to look professional in the environment with which they were working, and they had felt like they had to really overcome because a lot of times people were younger or coming from a much more experience or a different type of experience. Anyway, they felt like they had to really work hard to make themselves look a professional and worthy of the position that they were in. And then they looked at me and said, because at the time I was living in Los Angeles, which, you know, Hollywood, all the people always looking their best, having nannies and whatnot. And I had my youngest child, or my oldest daughter, was young at that time. And they looked at me and said, well, I can't imagine how you feel being in the way that you dress and living where you live. And I thought, wow, that was when I was like, was that a dig? And, you know, and it was said with a chuckle and said in a funny way. And it was like, you know, I'm really challenged, but you must really be challenged. Oh, because I'm less than. So it was meant to make me feel less than. And several years later, and some therapy, I started to say to this same person, you know, did you intend for that to hurt my feelings? Did you really mean for that to sound as insulting as it came out? I just started putting everything back on that person and just saying, was that really necessary? Is that what you intended? And after a while, the result was, and I'm going to actually go to the next slide, because that's not the slide I wanted to go to, but when you start establishing boundaries, you can expect some kickback. You're going to get some challenges. And so that person came back to me and said, you know what, I haven't been feeling really good about myself when we have our conversations, so I'm going to take a break. And I was like, that's okay. Well, let me know when you can talk to me like a human being instead of being so insulting. So, but here's what happens when you know, these are the relationships when you have, if you look at this diagram, there's you at the center of it. I don't know. Does anybody see my cursor in front of or is it invisible?
Nope, we can see it.
Okay, good. So here we are at the center, right? And and your inner circle is really going to be your immediate family, and your children, and then maybe your parents, right? And then as you go out, it's going to be your friends, maybe your boss. And if you notice, the boss and the siblings are on the further side of it. And then from there, it becomes, your community and your church, right? Those are the last, and then people you don't know. So your innermost center is you. You protect, so you let very few people into that inner circle. And then as you widen it, there are people you trust less and less, and less and less. So there's going to be different relationships are going to have different boundaries, but you're going to require the same amount of respect, right? You're not going to let anybody, you're not going to give anybody the key to your gate unless they earn it with consistency. This is a slide that I was talking about. You're going to expect some pushback. When you start establishing boundaries with people, particularly the closer they are to you, the more difficult it's going to be. They're going to test you again and again to see if you really mean it. Nobody likes it when they can no longer trample on through your garden, right? If they're used to it, it's a habit for a lot of people, and it can become difficult. But people who benefited from the lack of boundaries may struggle with your healthy ones, right? So if somebody was always, I recently had a coworker that would always come to me and knew that I had a soft spot, particularly for kids. When you work with kids, you get asked a lot. And I just started saying no and not being available. And pretty soon I still get a call every now and then asking me for something because I'm still affiliated with the organization. But it is interesting to me that they try one time and that's it. Before it was two, three, four times. And I started noticing the pattern of how they spoke to me. And that's when I started going, okay, this is a pattern. I'm going to test it. But they keep pushing back. Every now and then they keep pushing back. But what can you do? Stay calm, stay kind, stay consistent. In 2024, randomized controlled study found that boundary management training produces measurable behavior change, and that the internal safety is the key mechanism for lasting results. Internal safety. There's that safety word again. So, flourishing. So now that we know where we, one of the things that you can use with those challenging, when you get a challenging situation, is you say it's the I feel, I want response. When you say those negative things to me, I feel like you are trying to communicate that I'm less than you. I want you to start behaving or start using kinder words toward me, or I don't need you in my life at all. That's one way you can establish. So I feel, I want. That's how we establish those boundaries. And when they finally get the hint, then your relationship will either end or it will flourish, right? But your garden will flourish. Healthy boundaries don't keep love out. They create a space where your love can flourish. So when fence posts, so the question that I'd like to ask is, what fence post will you plant this week? So again, I want to go back to that question. Describe a situation where either you wanted to say no and didn't, and what happened, or felt you needed to say no and did, and what happened. And we can talk about that after the recording so that we can keep that, but just between us ladies, right? So anyone else who's watching the replay, you can ask yourself, what fence post will you plant this week? What boundary will you establish? Where do you recognize that you need to establish one? And what are you going to do about it? And then how can you maintain it, right? So that is my presentation on boundaries and the connection with the shepherd's hook or the candy cane. So I've been saving this candy cane for quite a while in my drawer just for this occasion. And unfortunately it did break, which makes it less tasty, in my opinion.
That was great.
It's so
Thank
helpful.
you.
We'll keep this recording for a few minutes and let everyone know so that if there is a private share, we don't, that's not something we want you to feel safe if there's something. So Tam, oh my gosh, some of those spots that you did share, I'm always an open book. I was like, ooh, that one hurt. That one was a little testy. Or we'll say that was a little prickly.
Prickly.
It was like
Yeah.
a cactus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love the way you laid that out, because the garden that we grow is so valuable and what we plant in it makes a difference. And even the reference to a cement wall, which um, Jen is on tonight, and she and her husband own a landscaping business. So I'm not sure she has quite looked at, you know,
Gardens the same way.
landscaping. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. So very helpful. Is there anything anyone wants to share before we turn off the video? I'll turn off because this is why it's so great to join us live because we had some fun conversation. We were giving such great credit to Karen. We get on and we share requests, we share frustrations, concerns, prayers, the things, and she is enduring a lot of challenges and she's here. She could have very easily said, I'm not going to be here because my house is a disaster because my ceiling fell in. And instead, she rearranged, moved things. She was even supposed to go to dinner tonight. That got changed. So she had something for her. So that's what we absolutely love in the space and place. We know not everyone can be live. I know Jen's coming in from another meeting, and we have the option and choices to be here. And we know live is the best. So we're thankful that you're here. And if you want to reach out to Tamara for any extensive support, she is a wealth of knowledge and has an incredible support system in what she's created with more than espresso.
Yeah, stronger than espresso.
Stronger than espresso. I was trying to
It's
see the
rebranded.
color.
It's actually called Stronger Women now, which makes like way more sense. But
Oh,
Brooke, Dr. Brooke, let me see if I have her picture on the back. Dr. Brooke Jones. You can't see it, can you? Yeah, okay. She actually had a dream, and God spoke to her and said, "You're going to start a group called Stronger Than Espresso." And she was like,
oh,
okay, and she tells her personal story of surviving domestic abuse. So it's quite amazing. But yeah, last
I
I knew
love
she
it.
was writing a book about her personal life, but yeah, Stronger Than Espresso. I still like the name, so
Yeah, no, that's so good, especially if you're a coffee drinker. There's a difference between coffee and espresso for sure.
it's really strong.
So, thank you for your beautiful message. We're going to end the recording here, and we gather, we grow, and we inspire each other. Again, like I said, some of us know each other, and some of us feel like we've known each other all our lives because there's something special about connecting here online in a space for 1 hour a week. So, we're grateful that you were passed on this message, and now we're going to get to a more detailed
We have a
conversation.
discussion.
Ciao for now.